The Black community's contribution to our nation is profound on every level and in every aspect of society.
We are full strength, and we are here to say that the systemic racism plaguing our country must stop.
Although we encompass a broad range of backgrounds, ages, genders, and musical influences,
we are united in our support for our Black brothers and sisters.
Each of us is indebted to the countless Black artists whose influence impacts every song we perform.
From Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, Stevie Wonder, and Aretha Franklin, to Marvin Gaye, Prince, Bruno Mars, Snoop Dogg, and Beyoncé.
These artists embedded their musical voice in our ears, in our memories, and in our hearts.
They've influenced how and why we play our instruments.
The legacy of Black musical artists in this country cannot be ignored.
And as much as their voices resonate in our head, we know not everyone has a voice.
We stand with the voiceless. We stand with all of those struggling to make their voices heard.
we stand.
We stand with those on the front lines making a difference.
We stand.
We stand in solidarity with those musicians who have not been properly recognized for their achievements.
We stand.
Today we share with you the Black artists that inspire us in every note we play.
The artists whose music moved us from the depth of despair to the height of joy.
The musicians that have influenced me are Sammy Davis Jr., an incredible performer, Nita Baker, who had a vocal ability to take you somewhere with the texture of her voice, Sarah Vaughan, who had an incredible, masterful vocal ability, Marcus Miller, my very favoriteest bass player of all time, Michael Jackson, who's the king of pop, Prince, one of my biggest influences, just incredibly creative, a creative musical genius. Funkadelic and Parliament, adding my favorite rock and funk together.
One thing I learned from great Black vocalists like Louis Armstrong, Howlin' Wolf, and Screamin' Jay Hawkins is that they, like many others, have taught us and truly understood that it's not just the lyrics that tell the story in a song. It's the way the words are delivered. It can give new life to the message or change it entirely. Even if you don't pick up on the words that are said, or in the case of Armstrong singing on a tune like West End Blues, if there are no words at all, the story, the emotions, the message is as clear as day. And these artists demonstrate that singing is more than just reciting the written words. The delivery of those words shapes the messages even more than the words themselves.
There are so many musicians I could talk about right now that have influenced the way I, as a performer and vocalist, do my thing. But three I would love to mention that really move me with their freedom and eloquence and expression of their voice. They had a sort of emotional intelligence that just grabbed people and pulled them in. And you knew when they were singing, you weren't just listening. You were part of the experience. And those three women are Bessie Smith, amazing jazz blues singer, Nina Simone, how much more down to earth and grindy and just heart and passion. And of course, Donna Summer. We can't forget Donna. Oh my goodness. Just letting it go, freedom of expression.
One influential artist who has inspired me as well as any guitarist has been the legendary Jimi Hendrix, who's had a huge impact on the electric guitar and its innovation and development. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame describes Jimi as the greatest instrumentalist in the history of rock music.
Ask any bassist who their major influences are, and two Black artists are bound to be at the top of the list. James Jamerson was largely uncredited, but was the foundation of the Motown sound, playing on virtually every one of their hits. And Larry Graham, he invented the slap bass technique, which is the staple of every solid funk bass player.
From my parents' records of big bands like Count Basie to the big band of James Brown with saxophonists like Nat Jones, Sinclair Pinckney, and of course Maceo Parker, the saxophone always spoke to me. Then there was the Motown sound, Stevie Wonder and a long list of others, anchored by the inimitable bass guitar of James Jamerson. Then it was on to the unforgettable Grover Washington Jr., accompanied by the genius of Marcus Miller, which continues to this day. There was also the incredible Wilton Felder of the Jazz Crusaders and Gerald Albright, both phenomenal saxophonists and incredible bassists as well. These are the musical heroes that have inspired me, and I am blessed to be in this band, continuing to emulate them.
The trombone has a place in the music that I love and the music that I play because of Black musicians. They created the sound, they created the space, there's no question about that. I especially am inspired by Trombone Shorty, and the passion and excitement that he brings to his playing is something that I strive to do whenever I play, and I'm continuously learning and looking up to him.
As a jazz saxophone player and piano player, I'd say that my biggest influences are actually Black musicians. This goes all the way back to Scott Joplin and his innovation of ragtime music, going on to Art Tatum and his innovations with stride piano, on to Oscar Peterson and his innovations in jazz, as well as Herbie Hancock, who's still around making great music, and his innovations in jazz fusion and hip-hop. Going on to saxophone, Charlie Parker and John Coltrane are probably my two top influences, and I'd probably say that most people studying saxophone today, who are professionals, if you haven't studied John Coltrane or Charlie Parker, you're missing a huge part of your vocabulary.
I've learned about expressing raw emotion through music, and many Black artists have taught me. I've emulated B.B. King blues style, Fred Wesley's funk, and Louis Armstrong's jazz, just to name a few. I've read their biographies and read about the Black struggle, especially from an artist's perspective. And at a B.B. King concert, I'm proud to say that he inspired me to get back to music after a hiatus. Probably my sax sounded more like his wailing blues guitar than anything at first, but thank you, B.B.
Musical artists that have inspired me have included Wynton Marsalis because of the musical freedom that he plays with, Bob Marley because of the message that he gives, as well as the musicians from the New Orleans style brass bands and the sounds and the rhythms that they're able to create. And then also I take a lot of influence from vocalists such as Sly Stone and Jennifer Hudson.
My biggest influences came from the set list of my first big gig in 1974. Chuck Berry and Little Richard formed the foundation for every rock and roll song that I've played since. I love the drummers, Billy Cobham, Jimo from the Allman Brothers, Lenny White, and Buddy Miles, bassist Stanley Clark, and the most influential of all, my brother from Compton, Dwayne the Pocket Hathorn. Wop bop a loo bop a bop bam.
Now I have a few artists that have inspired me my entire career. Duke Ellington, Quincy Jones, Ray Charles, Motown artists, including the Funk Brothers, Aretha Franklin, Billie Holiday, Miles Davis, Al Green, Hendrix, Bar-Kays, Commodores, Sly and the Family Stone. List goes on and on.
One of those artists who was such an influence on me was Aretha Franklin. I have the honor and privilege of paying tribute to her globally. And one of the things as you research her, amongst many other artists such as Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder, Little Richard, and the list goes on and on, the power of music brought, regardless of race, everybody in the same room. And it brought us closer to a place of unity. We still have a lot of work to do, as you see in today's time. But music has been such a pivotal point and such a infusion of bringing love, joy, and unity by the power that it brings among these amazing voices throughout the history of time. So we stand in hopes of unity. We stand in hopes of Black Lives Matter, and we thank you.
Even though I play and studied saxophone, one of my major musical influences has always been Miles Davis, a jazz trumpet player. I want to share a brief story about him that brings light to the fact that racism and racial injustice is deep-rooted in America's history, and that we, as a nation, desperately need change. On August 25th, 1959, just 8 days after the release of his famous album, Kind of Blue, Miles was performing at Birdland, recording an Armed Forces Day broadcast for Voice of America. In between sets, he was having a smoke in front of the club when a police officer approached him and asked him to move on. Miles explained to the officer that he was performing inside and that it was his name on the sign. Still, the officer persisted, not caring who he was or what he was doing. While this exchange was going on, a detective came out of nowhere and hit Miles in the head a few times with a club, drawing blood. Miles was then arrested and taken into custody. After getting his head stitched up at the hospital, he was charged with assault on an officer. Unfortunately, the injustice that happened to Miles Davis that day over 60 years ago is still a reality to Black Americans and people of color today. Now, more than ever, we need to fight to end racism in America.
We stand for Black people who do not have a voice.
We stand.
Their voices are taken away by overt acts of racism, as well as the all too prominent systems of institutional racism that plague our country today. We stand with everyone who is posting and protesting in order to shame racist people in actions.
We stand.
And we are also standing with everybody who is donating and voting in order to change racist systems and factions.
We stand.
Once we live in a nation where racist acts are shamed, those racist people are detained, and those racist institutions are changed, only then will we hear everyone's voice. Black Lives Matter.